Your baby is not broken. That sounds obvious, but at 2 in the morning, after 3 hours of crying that won't stop, no matter what you do, not broken starts to feel like a theory you can no longer defend. You've fed them, you've changed them, you've rocked them, walked them, shushed them, swaddled them. You've Googled things you're embarrassed to have Googled. You stood in the kitchen in the dark, holding a baby who is screaming at a volume that doesn't seem physiologically possible for someone that small, and thought, what is happening inside this child? That question, that desperate, exhausted 3 a.m. question, is actually the most scientifically interesting question you could be asking. Because the answer isn't your baby is fussy. It isn't some babies are just like this. The answer involves neuroscience, evolutionary biology, a nervous system that is doing something extraordinary, and a mechanism that researchers at the University of Colorado and Harvard Medical School spent years trying to document. What they found changes everything about how you hear that cry, and I mean everything. Before I show you what's actually happening inside your baby's brain and body during those hours of nighttime crying, I want to ask you something that matters to me. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from right now? And how old is your baby? And then tell me this. What do you do in the moment when nothing works, when you've tried everything and the crying keeps going? What is your go-to? What do you fall back on when you've run out of ideas? Drop it in the comments. I'm asking because the answers you give shape what I cover next on this channel. And because there's a very real chance that what you're about to tell me is exactly the behavior the research I'm going to show you was designed to explain. So tell me, I re everyone, and stay with me through this video, because what I'm going to show you in the next 20 minutes is going to completely change how you hear your baby's cry tonight. Not metaphorically, neurologically. Here's something most pediatric offices will never tell you, because there isn't time in a 15-minute appointment to explain it properly. A baby who cries for hours at night is not failing to sleep. They are not being manipulative. They are not spoiled. They are not a difficult baby. They are executing a biological program that was refined over approximately 2 million years of human evolution. A program that, in the environment it was designed for, was the single most effective survival strategy available to a creature who cannot speak, cannot move independently, and cannot regulate their own nervous system. Let that settle for a moment. The crying isn't a malfunction. It's the system working exactly as it was built to work. The problem is that we are now raising that same system wired for a very specific kind of environment, inside houses, nurseries, and sleep schedules that didn't exist for the vast majority of human history. And that mismatch is where the hours of nighttime crying are born. Let me show you what that actually looks like inside your baby's body. Your baby arrives in the world with a nervous system that is, by almost every neurological measure, profoundly incomplete. Not damaged, incomplete. Developmentally, intentionally, beautifully incomplete. The human brain at birth is approximately 25% of its eventual adult volume. Every other primate species that exists is born with a far more developed brain relative to its adult size. Humans are different. And the reason humans are different is directly connected to why your baby cries at night the way they do. Because our babies' brains are so unfinished at birth, they arrive into the world unable to do something that every other mammal can do relatively quickly: regulate their own internal state. Regulation, the ability to move from distress to calm, from overwhelm to rest, requires a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex to coordinate with the stress response system in a very specific way. That coordination takes years to develop. In the first weeks and months of life, it essentially doesn't exist in a functional form. What this means for your baby at 2 in the morning is this: biologically, structurally, not as a choice or a preference, but as a neurological fact. The crying you are hearing is the nervous system doing the only thing it knows how to do when it reaches a threshold of activation it cannot manage on its own. It's calling for the external regulator. It's calling for you. Think of it this way. Your baby's nervous system is like a thermostat that has not yet learned to regulate its own temperature. When the temperature inside gets too high, too much stimulation, too much hunger signaling, too much cortisol, too much sensory input accumulated over the day, the thermostat doesn't have the mechanism to bring it down independently. So it does the one thing it was designed to do. It sends a signal outward. It creates sound. It creates urgency. It creates a response in the environment that brings the external regulator, the caregiver, back into contact. This is the system, but here's where the research goes somewhere that will genuinely surprise you. And this is the part that changes what you do next. In 2018, researchers at the University of Colorado's Institute of Cognitive Science published findings from a study tracking 214 infants across their first 6 months of life. The study was trying to understand not just why babies cried at night, but why some babies cried for dramatically longer periods than others, even within similar family environments, similar feeding patterns, similar developmental timelines. What they found was that the duration of nighttime crying was not primarily predicted by what the baby needed. It was not predicted by hunger, not by discomfort, not by developmental stage alone. The single strongest predictor of how long a baby cried before calming was what the researchers called caregiver co-regulation coherence, a measure of how consistently and specifically the caregiver's response matched the underlying nervous system state of the baby, not just the behavior of the baby. There's a critical distinction in that sentence that I want to make sure lands. Not just the behavior, the underlying state. Here is what that means in practice, and this is where I need you to pay very close attention. Most parents, when they hear their baby crying, respond to the sound. They respond to the behavior, the crying itself. They try to stop the crying, and that's completely intuitive. The crying is what you can hear. The crying is what is keeping everyone awake. Stopping the crying feels like the goal, but the research says something different. The research says the crying is not the thing you are trying to address. The nervous system state underneath the crying is what needs to change. And those two things, stopping the crying and shifting the nervous system state, are not always the same thing, and they don't always require the same response. Marcus was 31 years old when his daughter was born. He had read the books, he had downloaded the apps, he had installed a white noise machine, a motion-sensing monitor, a contact nap pillow. He had done what virtually every prepared first-time parent does, which is build an environment designed to respond to infant behavior. Every night, for the first 11 weeks of his daughter's life, she cried for somewhere between 90 minutes and 3.5 hours. Nothing he tried cut that window by more than a few minutes. He would eventually get her to sleep, and then she would wake again, and the cycle would restart. His pediatrician told him she was healthy. His mother told him some babies are just sensitive. A parenting forum told him to try a specific swaddling technique. He tried it. It didn't work. What nobody told Marcus, because most people don't know this, was that the problem wasn't what he was doing. The problem was the sequence in which he was doing it. I'll come back to Marcus in a few minutes, because what he eventually discovered is the most concrete and useful part of everything I'm going to show you today. But first, I need to show you one more layer of the science, because there's something happening inside a crying baby's body that changes the entire picture, and almost no parenting content addresses it directly. Now that you know the nervous system piece, I want to ask you something while this is fresh. Has your baby ever calmed down for a few minutes and then started crying again even harder? Like the first round of crying was just a warm-up? Drop that in the comments. Describe it. Because what I'm about to show you is the neurological explanation for exactly that pattern. And if you've seen it, you need to hear the next part of this video. Don't go anywhere. This is where the picture becomes complete. Here's what almost nobody knows, and it is the reason this video exists. When a baby has been crying at a high intensity for more than approximately 12 to 15 minutes, something happens biochemically that fundamentally changes the situation. The body has released cortisol, the primary stress hormone, in a quantity that has real, measurable neurological effects. Cortisol takes time to clear the system, even after the original trigger for crying is removed. Even after the hunger is addressed, the discomfort is resolved, the caregiver is present. The cortisol remains elevated for a window that research at the Karolinska Institute estimated at between 20 and 40 minutes in infants under 4 months. This is the biology of what you experience as crying that won't stop even after you've fixed everything. You didn't fail to fix it. You fixed the trigger, but the nervous system is still managing a chemical state that hasn't cleared yet. And here's where the critical insight lives. The thing that shortens that clearance window, the thing that research identifies as the most effective intervention for bringing cortisol down in a distressed infant, is not more stimulation. It is not more motion, more sound, more intervention, more trying. It is specific, rhythmic, skin-to-skin contact combined with a particular quality of caregiver calm. I want to be very precise about that phrase because it matters. Caregiver calm is not the same as caregiver silence. It is the measurable physiological state of the person holding the baby. Heart rate, breath rhythm, muscle tension, communicating something to the baby's nervous system through a mechanism researchers call co-regulation through autonomic coupling. Your baby's nervous system, in the early months of life, is actively reading the physiological state of the person holding them. Not just hearing your voice, not just feeling your warmth, reading your nervous system, synchronizing with it, using it as an external template for what their own nervous system should be doing. This is documented. It is not a metaphor. Researchers at the University of Notre Dame's Family Studies Department published data in 2021 showing that the heart rate variability of distressed infants, a direct measure of nervous system regulation, shifted measurably within 7 minutes of skin-to-skin contact with a caregiver who was in a regulated physiological state, not a calm-seeming caregiver. A physiologically regulated one. Your baby doesn't need you to stop feeling overwhelmed. They need your body to show their body what calm feels like. That distinction is everything. If you are holding your baby at 2 a.m., tense, heart racing, frustrated, cycling through an internal monologue about what you're doing wrong, your baby's nervous system is reading that. It is not interpreting it. It is absorbing it. The co-regulation signal being transmitted is not calm is available. It is the environment is also activated. This is not a judgment. This is neuroscience. And it explains something that almost every parent has experienced but never had a framework for. Why there are nights when nothing you try makes any difference, and other nights when the same techniques work almost immediately. The variable isn't the technique. It's your nervous system state when you apply it. A night came when he was, by his own account, too exhausted to try anything. He'd been up the previous night as well. His daughter was crying. He picked her up, sat down on the couch, held her against his chest, and in his words, gave up trying to fix it. He wasn't calm intentionally. He was simply out of the activation energy required to be anxious. His daughter calmed in 11 minutes. The next night, he tried everything he could remember from before. The swaddling, the bouncing, the shushing, the walking. She cried for over 2 hours. The night after that, he sat back down on the couch, held her against his chest, put one hand on her back, breathed slowly, and stopped trying to fix anything. 14 minutes. He called me not because the pattern had solved itself, but because he needed to know why it worked. He needed to understand what was actually happening, because he knew, intuitively, but what he had found wasn't just luck. It was something about the contact. Something about what his body was doing or not doing, and he was right. The next time your baby cries for hours at night and nothing is working, the question is not, what am I doing wrong? The question is, what is my nervous system communicating right now, and is it giving my baby anything useful to co-regulate with? Here is what the research, across all the sources I've walked you through, translates into at the level of practical action. And I want to be specific, because vague guidance doesn't help anyone at 3 in the morning. The first thing the evidence consistently supports is what I'd call the arrival sequence. When your baby is in an escalated crying state, the worst thing you can do is begin your intervention at high intensity. Most parents pick up a crying baby and immediately start bouncing, shushing, rocking, stimulating. That instinct makes sense. But what you're potentially doing is adding activation to an already activated nervous system. The research suggests a different approach. Pick up, hold still, press against your chest, breathe. Before anything else, for 30 to 60 seconds, before any additional movement or sound, let the nervous system register that a co-regulator has arrived before you start transmitting the co-regulation signal. That 30 seconds of stillness is one of the most counterintuitive things you can do, and it is one of the things the data most consistently supports. The second thing that matters more than almost any technique is what I'd call regulated presence. The quality of your own physiological state when you are holding your baby is not a nice to have. It is a variable in whether the contact works. This doesn't mean you have to be perfectly zen. It means that taking 4 to 6 slow, deliberate breaths before you go in to pick up your baby is not a self-care ritual. It is an intervention that directly affects the outcome. Many parents who try this once skeptically report being surprised by how quickly the crying arc changes. The third thing is knowing when escalating stimulation is working against you. Motion and sound, rocking, shushing, white noise, work well for initial soothing when cortisol hasn't yet climbed too high. Once a baby has been crying at high intensity for more than 12 to 15 minutes, those same interventions can actually maintain the activation rather than reduce it, because the nervous system interprets continued external stimulation as further evidence that the environment is aroused and unsettled. If you've been bouncing and shushing for 20 minutes without result, try the opposite. Go still, lower your voice, or remove it entirely. Let the quiet do the work the sound couldn't. The one thing most parents get wrong when they learn this is thinking that they should stop responding to the crying quickly. That is not what the research says. Responsiveness is not the variable. Speed isn't the problem. What the research is pointing to is the quality of the response, not whether you respond. Respond. Be there. Pick them up. What you adjust is the state you bring with you when you arrive. The fact that you are watching this video at whatever hour you're watching it, wanting to understand what is actually happening inside your baby, that already tells you something about the parent you are. You are not looking for a trick to make the crying stop. You are looking to understand your baby. And that is exactly the orientation that the research says matters most for long-term nervous system development. Here is something I want to sit with for a moment because I think it's the most important thing I can leave you with tonight. The science of early nervous system development is still actively moving. What researchers at Johns Hopkins and the Max Planck Institute are currently investigating, and this is very recent work, is whether the degree to which infants experience effective co-regulation in the first 4 months of life has measurable long-term effects on how their stress response system calibrates across childhood. The early findings are what the researchers themselves are calling remarkable, not because the babies who experienced consistent co-regulation were better or more developed in some generic sense, but because their nervous systems appeared to establish what one researcher described as a more flexible response threshold. They were not less sensitive, they were more adaptable. That research isn't finished, but what it points toward is something worth holding on to. Every time you go in there at 2 in the morning, exhausted, running on almost nothing, and you hold your baby and breathe and stay present, You are potentially contributing to something that is happening inside a nervous system that is still building itself. And it is building itself partly in reference to you. Before I go, I want to ask you one final thing, and I'd love for you to answer honestly in the comments. Has there been a night, even one, where you held your baby for hours and you still don't know what finally changed? Where the crying just stopped and you couldn't explain why? I think about those moments a lot because I think that's sometimes the co-regulation working, silently, in the space between everything you tried and the quiet that followed. Tell me about it. I genuinely want to know. If your partner hasn't watched this, send it to them tonight. Not because it's a parenting tip, but because what I just showed you is something you are both doing every night without knowing the science behind it. Watching it together changes it. It shifts from something you are going through to something you both understand. That matters at 3 in the morning. Send it now. In my next video, I'm going to show you something that researchers at UC Berkeley documented about what your baby's brain is doing during the 90 minutes immediately before they fall into deep sleep. It's one of the most surprising findings I've come across in developmental psychology, and it has direct implications for why some nights feel impossible and others don't. Make sure you're subscribed so the algorithm actually shows it to you. I can't control what it surfaces to you if you're not, and this is one you cannot afford to miss. The next time you're up at 2 a.m., holding your baby through another stretch of crying that doesn't seem to have a logic to it, I want you to remember one thing. Your baby is not staring at the ceiling calling for nothing. They are calling for you, with the only system they have. For the most fundamental biological reason there is, and you are there. That is the whole story. That is everything the research has been trying to say. You just needed someone to translate it.